The diner sat at the edge of a quiet town, the kind of place people only stopped by when the highway stretched too far without a rest. It wasn't fancy, just a small corner building with a flickering neon sign that read "Open 24 hours." Inside, the smell of coffee and fried food hung in the air, and the sound of old country songs played softly from a dusty speaker near the counter. Behind that counter worked a young woman who spent most of her days smiling through tiredness. She moved quickly from one table to another, carrying plates of eggs and pancakes, pouring coffee, and making sure every customer felt noticed. People liked her, though they never really knew her. She had that quiet kind of kindness that didn't need words. Her coworkers said she was too nice for this job, but she would just laugh it off and keep working. When the last customers left each night and the diner grew silent, she stayed a few minutes longer. There was an old piano sitting by the window, paint chipped and keys yellowed with age. Most people thought it was just decoration, something to make the diner feel homey. But she knew it still worked. She had tested it once, years ago, when she first started working there. Since then, it became her secret routine. When the lights dimmed and no one was watching, she would wipe her hands on her apron, sit down on the wooden stool, and play. Her fingers weren't trained by fancy teachers or music schools. Everything she knew came from listening, from feeling. She played slow tunes at first, unsure and quiet, like whispers meant only for herself. But as time passed, the music started to fill the diner, soft and warm. It was the only time she truly felt free, when she could let everything out. All the worry, all the waiting, all the small dreams she had buried. Her father used to tell her that she was born with a gift. He had worked long shifts at a factory when she was young, but on weekends he'd pull out an old radio, and they'd listen to classical music together. She would tap her fingers along to the notes, and he'd smile proudly, saying one day she'd play in front of people. But life had other plans. Her father got sick when she was still in high school, and by the time she graduated, there was no money left for college. The piano lessons she once dreamed about became something she only imagined. Now, years later, she worked 6 days a week just to pay rent and help her mother. She didn't complain, but there was a quiet sadness that lived behind her smile. Most people never noticed it. To them, she was just another waitress in a small-town diner, kind, polite, always remembering who liked extra syrup and who wanted their coffee black. Some nights, when she finished playing, she'd sit still for a while, letting the last notes fade into the empty air. She'd think about what her life could have been if things were different. But instead of feeling bitter, she'd take a deep breath, close the piano lid gently, and whisper, "Maybe one day." Then she'd turn off the lights and walk home under the streetlights, her shoes echoing softly against the pavement. Her apartment was small but neat. On the windowsill sat a little plant she had managed to keep alive for years, even though she forgot to water it sometimes. Music sheets, old and worn, lay on the table beside her bed. Some were scribbled with her own notes and melodies she had made up on slow nights. They weren't perfect, but they were hers. It was her way of keeping her dream alive, even if no one else saw it. Every morning started the same. The alarm buzzed, the coffee brewed, and she walked to work with her hair tied back and her uniform pressed. She greeted everyone with the same gentle smile. Life felt predictable, safe even, though somewhere inside her was a quiet ache, a longing she couldn't quite silence. The regular customers liked her. Truck drivers passing through town would always sit at her tables, asking about the weather, the coffee, or just chatting to pass time. There was an older man who came in every morning for pancakes, and he always tipped her $2 no matter the total. He once told her she reminded him of his daughter who lived far away. She smiled and thanked him, but never shared much about herself. It wasn't because she didn't want to. She just didn't know where to begin. Once a young couple with a baby stopped by late one evening. The baby wouldn't stop crying, and the mother looked exhausted. The woman behind the counter smiled softly, took out a small napkin, and began folding it into a tiny swan to make the baby laugh. It worked. The baby stopped crying, eyes wide at the moving paper bird. The mother looked at her with gratitude and whispered, "Thank you." Moments like that made her job feel a little less heavy. Still, every night, the piano waited by the window, quiet and patient. And every night she played. Some nights she played joyful songs, fast and bright, imagining herself on a big stage under soft lights. Other nights the melodies were slow and sad, telling stories no words could hold. The music became her diary, her confession, her prayer. One evening, as she was finishing her shift, a small group of people came in, travelers who looked tired but cheerful. They filled the diner with laughter, ordering burgers and milkshakes, teasing each other like old friends. She served them with her usual kindness, not realizing how that night would change everything. When they noticed the piano by the window, one of them joked that someone should play a song. She smiled politely but said nothing. She didn't want attention. The piano was her secret world. That night, as she wiped down the tables after they left, she looked at the piano again. The stool was slightly crooked, the keys uneven, but it felt like home. She sat down and began to play softly, thinking no one was there to hear. But she didn't know that soon. This simple act in this moment that belonged only to her would open a door she never thought she'd walk through. The night outside was quiet, the highway lights flickering in the distance. Her hands moved across the keys as if they had their own memory. Each note was a piece of her story, the struggles, the hope, the things she couldn't say out loud. If anyone had walked in just then, they might have thought she was a professional musician, not a waitress who worked long hours and dreamed quietly in the dark. When she finished, she looked at her reflection in the window. It showed a tired face but also a small spark, something alive. For the first time in a long while, she smiled. Not the polite smile she gave customers, but a real one. She didn't know it yet, but the world was about to notice that spark too. As she locked up the diner and stepped into the cool night, she hummed the melody she had just played. The stars above were faint, hidden behind thin clouds, but she didn't mind. She walked home slowly, her hands still tingling from the music. Maybe tomorrow would be just another day at the diner, or maybe, though she didn't dare believe it, tomorrow would be the start of something different. She didn't know it, but sometimes life has a way of finding people right where they least expect it. And for her, it would all begin in that little diner, with the old piano by the window and the music she played when no one was listening. The next evening came like any other. The diner lights flickered on, the coffee started to brew, and the smell of fried onions filled the air. She tied her apron, tucked a pencil behind her ear, and got ready for another long shift. It was Friday, which meant the place would stay busy until midnight. Locals came in after work, truckers stopped for dinner, and families passed through on their way somewhere else. It was the same rhythm she had lived for years, but that night felt a little different. There was something in the air, though she couldn't quite explain it. Maybe it was because she had slept well, or maybe it was because she had played so beautifully the night before that her heart still felt light. Whatever it was, she smiled a bit more easily that day. The first few hours went by as usual. She greeted regulars, filled coffee cups, and balanced plates in both hands without spilling a drop. The old jukebox played soft music, and the clatter of dishes mixed with laughter and conversation. Outside, rain began to fall lightly, tapping against the windows and painting silver lines on the glass. The world felt small, safe, and warm inside the diner. Around 8 o'clock, the door opened and a group of travelers walked in. 4 people, laughing and talking loudly as they shook off their umbrellas. They were probably passing through on their way to the city. They brought energy with them, the kind that made the quiet diner feel alive. She showed them to a booth by the window, handed them menus, and offered her usual friendly smile. They started talking right away, cracking jokes and teasing each other. One of them pointed toward the piano sitting by the window and said, "Hey, look at that old thing. I bet no one plays it anymore." Another laughed and said, "Yeah, probably just for decoration." She smiled softly as she poured water into their glasses. "It still works," she said without thinking. "Really?" One of them asked, looking surprised. "Do you play?" Her cheeks turned warm. "A little," she replied quickly, then changed the subject. "Would you like to hear the specials for tonight?" They nodded and she went on with her work, but she could still feel their curious glances. She didn't mean to draw attention. Her music was something private, something she kept just for herself. The thought of playing in front of strangers made her nervous. A few hours passed. The group stayed for dessert, telling stories and taking pictures. They had a friendly, open way about them. Before leaving, one of them, a tall man with kind eyes, looked at her again and said, "So when do we get to hear you play?" She laughed nervously. "Oh no, I just play when no one's around," he smiled. "That's a shame. I bet you're good." She shook her head, but inside a tiny spark of pride flickered. It felt nice to be noticed, even just for a second. After they left, she cleaned their table, humming softly to herself. But she didn't know that this small exchange was only the beginning. The next night, the same group came back. This time, they brought a few more friends with them. They said they liked the diner and wanted to try the milkshakes again. She was happy to see them. It made her shift a little brighter. As she served them their food, one of them said, "You promised to play for us this time." She froze for a second. "I didn't promise anything," she said, laughing. "Well, maybe not in words," the man replied, smiling. "But come on, please. Just one song. We won't tell anyone." The others joined in, clapping and teasing lightly. A few regular customers nearby looked up, curious. She shook her head, her heart beating faster. "I can't," she said. "I'm working." Her co-worker, who was wiping the counter, laughed and called out, "Oh, come on. You always play when the place is empty. Let them hear what I've been telling them about." She looked at her with surprise. "You told them?" "Of course," her co-worker said. "You play better than half the people on the radio." Now everyone in the diner was looking her way. Her face turned red and she laughed nervously. "You're all making fun of me." "No, seriously," the man said gently. "We just want to hear you." "One song," she hesitated, then looked around. There were still a few customers eating, but the dinner rush had ended. The rain outside had turned into a steady drizzle, making the windows blur with tiny droplets. The lights inside glowed warm and soft. For a moment, it didn't feel so scary. She took a deep breath and said quietly, "All right, just one song." A cheer went up around the diner, not loud or wild, but warm and encouraging. She felt her hands tremble as she walked toward the piano. The stool creaked as she sat down. She brushed her fingers over the keys, feeling the smooth surface under her skin. The chatter in the diner faded into a hush. At first, she didn't know what to play. Then she remembered a melody she had written herself a long time ago. Something soft and simple, filled with emotion. She closed her eyes and began. The first few notes were quiet, uncertain. But soon the rhythm found her and the music started to flow. Her fingers moved like they were telling a story, one made of all her hidden feelings, the long days, the small dreams, the quiet hopes. The sound filled the diner, gentle but strong. The customers stopped eating. The travelers leaned forward, listening closely. Even her coworker stood still behind the counter, smiling. The rain outside seemed to fall in rhythm with the song. It was as if the whole world had paused to listen. She didn't think about how she looked or who was watching. For those few minutes, there was only the music. Every note came from deep inside her heart. She played with emotion that words could never express. Her eyes stayed closed, her head tilted slightly as if she were lost in another place. A place where life was simple and free. When the last note faded into silence, she opened her eyes. The diner was completely still for a moment. Then slowly people began to clap. The sound grew louder until the whole room was filled with applause. Some smiled, others looked moved, and one woman even wiped away a tear. Her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know what to do, so she just smiled shyly and whispered, "Thank you." The man who had asked her to play walked up and said, "That was beautiful. You've got something special." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "It's just something I do for fun." He smiled knowingly. "Maybe. But talent like that isn't ordinary." She didn't know how to respond, so she just went back to cleaning tables, her cheeks still warm from the attention. But inside, something had changed. For the first time in years, she had played for others, and they had loved it. When she finished her shift that night, she sat by the piano again, alone once more. The echoes of her performance still filled the air. She touched the keys lightly and smiled. Maybe she wasn't just a waitress. Maybe there was more waiting for her out there. As she walked home, she replayed the moment in her mind, the way everyone had listened, the way the music had come alive. It made her feel something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Real, living hope. She didn't know that someone in that group had recorded her playing on their phone. She didn't know that the video would soon find its way online, or that thousands of people would see it. She just went to bed that night with a full heart, not realizing her life was quietly about to change forever. The morning after that special night felt ordinary, but inside she felt something new. The sun came up like always. The alarm buzzed and she walked to the diner with her usual calm steps. Yet every time she thought about what happened, she couldn't help but smile. She still couldn't believe she had actually played in front of people, and even more that they had loved it. The day started quietly. The regulars came in for breakfast, chatting about the weather and the local news. She poured coffee and served plates of toast and eggs. Everything looked the same, but the world felt a little lighter to her. Every time she passed by the piano, she glanced at it, remembering how the sound had filled the room the night before. She didn't know that something unexpected was already happening. The group of travelers who had cheered for her had left town early that morning, but one of them had posted the video online. The short clip showed her sitting at the old piano, fingers moving gracefully, her face calm and focused. The caption read, "The waitress who played like a legend." Within hours, people began to share it. While she was busy refilling coffee cups, the video was being watched by strangers far away. Comments poured in. People said her music gave them chills, that it made them cry, that it felt real, pure. Some asked who she was, what her name was, and where that diner was. Others simply wrote, "Beautiful." But she didn't know any of this yet. To her, it was just another long day at work. By lunchtime, the diner was full, and she barely had time to catch her breath. She didn't even notice when two customers sitting near the counter whispered to each other, showing something on a phone screen that looked familiar. Late in the afternoon, her coworker came running from the back room holding up her phone. "You won't believe this," she said, eyes wide. "You're on the internet!" She laughed, confused. "What are you talking about?" "The video," her coworker said, showing her the phone screen. "The one from last night. Look, it's everywhere." She took the phone carefully and stared at the video playing. It was her, sitting at the piano, playing the same melody she thought no one would ever hear again. Her hands shook slightly as she watched herself. The comments rolled by so fast she could barely read them. She saw thousands of views, then tens of thousands. "That can't be real," she whispered. Her coworker laughed. "It's real. You're going viral." She didn't know what to say. Her heart raced between excitement and fear. She never asked for attention. She played because it was the only way she knew how to express herself. But now people from all over the world were listening. By evening, the diner phone started ringing. Some people called just to ask if the story was true. A few wanted to know if she would play again that night. Her boss looked at her with surprise and a small smile. "Guess you're famous now," he said jokingly. She smiled back shyly. "I don't know about that." When the dinner rush ended, she stood by the window looking at the piano again. Part of her wanted to hide, to pretend nothing had changed. But another part of her, the part that had once dreamed of stages and spotlights, wanted to play again. Not for fame, but for the feeling it gave her. Her boss nodded toward the piano. "Go on," he said softly. "People came here hoping to hear you. Don't make them wait." Her hands trembled slightly as she sat down. The diner grew quiet again, just like the night before. She began to play the same melody, this time with more confidence. Her heart still raced, but she let the music lead her. People listened, some holding up their phones to record. The sound filled the room once again, warm and full of emotion. When she finished, the applause was louder than before. Someone shouted, "Encore!" and she laughed, covering her face for a moment. Then she played one more song, something she hadn't played in years, a piece her father used to love. By the end of it, she had tears in her eyes, and she wasn't the only one. Later that night, after everyone had left, she sat alone at the counter, sipping a cup of tea. Her coworker joined her, grinning. "You know, people are calling you a legend online," she said. "You should read the comments." "Everyone loves you," she smiled softly. "It feels strange," she said. "I'm just a waitress who plays a piano after work." Her coworker shook her head. "Not anymore. You've got something special. People can feel it." When she went home, her phone buzzed nonstop. She didn't even know how to handle it all. Messages poured in, from people she hadn't spoken to in years, from strangers saying her music inspired them, even from a few who said her song helped them through a hard day. Reading those words made her heart swell. For so long, she had thought no one cared about her music. Now it was reaching people she'd never meet. As the days passed, the diner became busier. More and more people stopped by, saying they had seen the video. Some came from nearby towns. Others drove for hours just to visit. They wanted to hear her play in person. She felt overwhelmed but also grateful. Every time she sat at the piano now, She played not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt small or forgotten. One afternoon, as she was finishing a song, a man approached her table. He looked a little older, dressed neatly with a friendly but serious face. He introduced himself as someone who worked in the music industry. "I saw your video," he said. "You have real talent. Have you ever thought about recording?" She blinked in surprise. "Recording? No, I've never done anything like that," he smiled. "Well, maybe it's time to start. There's something about your music that's honest. People need that." She didn't know what to say. The idea felt too big, too far away. She wasn't sure if she was ready for something like that. She still thought of herself as the girl who worked double shifts and played old songs at night. But something about the man's tone felt sincere. He gave her his card and said, "Think about it. Don't rush. Just know that doors like this don't open every day." Then he left, leaving her standing by the piano with her heart pounding. That night she couldn't sleep. The thought of recording, of sharing her music beyond the diner, filled her mind. Could she really do it? Did she deserve it? She thought about her father's words, how he once told her she had a gift. Maybe he had been right all along. The next morning she woke up early and walked to the diner before it opened. The sky was still pale and the streets were quiet. She unlocked the door, turned on the lights, and sat down at the piano. Her hands rested on the keys. For a long time she didn't play. She just sat there listening to the silence. Then she began to play softly, a new melody she had never played before. It felt different, hopeful, bright, alive. Every note seemed to tell her that her life was changing. She didn't know where it would lead, but for the first time in years she was ready to find out. As the morning light streamed through the windows, she smiled to herself. Maybe she wasn't just the girl behind the counter anymore. Maybe she was something more, someone the world had finally started to hear. The following week moved faster than she could keep up. Every day, new people came into the diner asking if they could hear her play. Some even brought flowers or small gifts, leaving notes that said things like, "Your music made my day better." It felt strange, almost unreal. For so long her world had been small. Just the diner, her little apartment, and the quiet walks home. Now people she had never met were calling her an inspiration. At first she felt shy about it. The attention made her nervous. She still saw herself as the same simple woman who served pancakes and coffee. But each time someone asked to hear her music, she couldn't say no. She didn't want to disappoint anyone. So she played soft, beautiful songs that made people pause and smile. Some even cried quietly while listening. And every time she saw that, her heart felt full. Maybe this was what she was meant to do all along. The man who had given her his business card stopped by again a few days later. He watched her play for a while, then waited until her shift ended. When she came over, he said, "You haven't called me yet." She smiled politely. "I've been busy. I understand," he said. "But I wasn't joking when I said you have something rare. You don't just play notes. You make people feel something real. That's what the world is missing." His words made her heart race. She wanted to believe him, but part of her still doubted herself. "I don't know anything about the music business," she said. "I've never recorded before." "That's okay," he said. "That's what I'm here for. I'll help you. We can start small. Just one recording. No pressure." She looked down, thinking about it. "I don't even know if I'm ready for that." He smiled gently. "You'll never feel ready. You just have to start." After he left, she sat at the piano for a long time, lost in thought. The sound of his words stayed with her. She had spent years playing for no one. Now the world wanted to listen. Maybe it was time to be brave. A week later, she finally called the number on the card. The man sounded happy to hear her voice. He invited her to come to the city to visit his small recording studio. "You don't have to sign anything," he said. "Just come and play. That's all." The thought made her nervous. The city was far from her small town, and she hadn't traveled in years. But something inside her said this was a chance she couldn't ignore. She asked for a few days off from the diner. Her boss, who had watched her journey with pride, smiled and said, "Go, you deserve this." The morning she left, the town was quiet. She packed her old keyboard notebook, a few clothes, and a worn photo of her father. The bus ride to the city felt long, but she spent most of it watching the passing fields and thinking about how life had changed in just a few weeks. When she arrived, the man met her outside the studio. The building looked simple from the outside, but when she stepped in, she felt like she had entered another world. The walls were lined with sound panels. The air smelled faintly of coffee and wood, and there were instruments everywhere. Guitars, drums, keyboards, microphones. It was like stepping into a dream she'd once given up on. He introduced her to a few people who worked there. They greeted her warmly, saying they had all seen the video of her diner performance. One woman smiled and said, "You play with your heart. That's rare." Her hands trembled slightly as she sat down at the studio piano. It was much newer and shinier than the one in the diner, but the keys still felt familiar under her fingers. "Play whatever you want," the man said softly. She closed her eyes and began to play. The sound was pure and clear, filling the room in a way that made everyone stop what they were doing. She didn't try to impress anyone. She just let the music speak. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a few moments before the man finally said, "That's it. That's the sound we've been waiting for." They recorded her playing for hours that day. Sometimes she played songs she knew by heart. Other times, she made up melodies on the spot. The sound engineer kept smiling and nodding, saying things like, "You've got magic in your hands." For the first time in her life, she felt like she truly belonged somewhere. When they finished, the man looked at her and said, "We'll take care of the rest. You just keep doing what you do. Be yourself." She went back home the next day, exhausted but happy. The experience felt unreal, like something out of a dream. She didn't know what would come of it, but she was proud of herself for taking the chance. Weeks passed, and life at the diner returned to its normal rhythm, except now, she had something new to look forward to. She still worked her shifts, still smiled at customers, still played for them when they asked. But deep inside, she carried a quiet excitement, a secret hope. Then one evening, while she was cleaning the tables after closing, her co-worker came rushing in with a phone in her hand. "You have to see this," she said, breathless. "Your song is online." "The one you recorded." She froze. "What do you mean?" "They released it. It's everywhere." She took the phone and stared at the screen. There it was, her name, her song, her music, and out in the world for everyone to hear. The video showed her sitting in the studio, eyes closed, fingers dancing across the keys. The comments were full of love. People said the song gave them peace, that it reminded them of home, that it felt like a story without words. Tears filled her eyes. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. All she had ever wanted was to share her music, and now it was happening. For real. The next day, more people than ever came to the diner. Some even recognized her from the video. They took pictures with her, asked for autographs, and told her how much her music meant to them. She felt shy but happy, grateful for every kind word. That evening, as the sun set, she sat by the piano once more. The diner was full, and everyone waited quietly as she placed her hands on the keys. She looked up, smiled softly, and began to play. The notes floated through the air, gentle and full of emotion. It wasn't about fame or success. It was about connection, about touching hearts. As she played, she thought of her father. She imagined him sitting somewhere, smiling proudly. Maybe he could hear her now. Maybe he always could. When the song ended, the room erupted in applause. People stood, cheering and clapping, and she felt something deep inside her heart open. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a musician, a storyteller, someone who had turned her pain and dreams into something beautiful. That night, when she walked home, the sky was clear. The stars shone bright, and the cool wind brushed against her face. She felt free more than ever before. The world was suddenly bigger, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had started her journey in a quiet diner, playing for herself when no one listened. Now her music had found its way to people she would never meet, carrying a piece of her heart with it, and deep down she knew this was only the beginning. The days that followed felt like a dream she didn't want to wake up from. Every morning when she came into the diner, there were more people waiting to see her. Some came from nearby towns, others from faraway cities. They said they had heard her song online and wanted to meet the woman who played it. The diner, once quiet and almost forgotten, was now full every night. The sound of laughter, the clinking of cups, and the low hum of conversations filled the air. She still worked the same way she always had, serving food, clearing tables, and chatting with customers. But there was something different in the way people looked at her now. They didn't just see a waitress. They saw someone who had touched their hearts through music, And even though all the attention made her shy, she felt grateful. Every smile, every kind word reminded her that her music mattered. Her song continued to spread. Local newspapers wrote about her. Small radio stations started playing her recording. A few bigger stations picked it up too. People online began sharing her story. A woman who had worked in a diner and accidentally became known for her beautiful piano playing. She read the articles and felt a mix of pride and disbelief. It still felt strange to think the world was talking about her. The man who had helped her record the song called her one afternoon. "I think it's time we talk about what's next," he said. "You have more songs in you. Let's make an album." The word album made her heart skip. She had written many little melodies in her notebook over the years, but the idea of sharing them with the world felt overwhelming. "I don't know if I'm ready for that," she said honestly. He laughed softly. "You said that the first time too." "Look how that turned out," she smiled. He was right. She had been afraid then, but taking that chance had changed everything. Maybe it was time to take another one. They began working together again, slowly and simply. Every weekend she took the bus to the city to record new songs. The studio became her second home. Sometimes she stayed late, lost in her music until everyone else had gone home. The sound engineers would listen quietly, always amazed at how naturally her playing carried emotion. She didn't think about fame or success. She just wanted to make something honest. One evening, while recording a new piece, she paused halfway through. The man in the studio asked, "What's wrong?" She smiled faintly. "This one's for my father," she said. "I want to get it right." She took a deep breath and started again. The melody was slow and gentle, full of warmth and sadness. When she finished, the room was silent. The man wiped his eyes and said, "That was perfect." When the album was finally finished, it was released quietly. No big ads, no grand events, just her music, out there for whoever wanted to listen. But the response was bigger than anyone expected. People called it peaceful, healing, beautiful. Some said her songs helped them through lonely nights. Others said they played them for their children before bed. Her music became a comfort to people she'd never meet. Back at the diner, her co-workers cheered for her. Her boss even hung a small framed newspaper article near the counter. It read, "From Diner to Dreams, the waitress who played her way into hearts." She blushed every time she saw it, but secretly she felt proud. One evening, as she was wiping tables, a family came in, a mother, father, and a young boy who looked about 10. The boy carried a small keyboard under his arm. When she brought their food, the mother smiled and said, "Our son started learning piano because of you." The boy looked shy but excited. "I watch your video all the time," he said. "I want to play like you someday." Her eyes softened. "That's wonderful," she said gently. "Just keep playing. Play what feels true to you." The boy grinned and nodded. Before leaving, the family asked if she would take a picture with them. She agreed, feeling a warmth she couldn't quite describe. She had never imagined that her story would inspire someone else to start their own journey. Days turned into weeks, and her life slowly balanced between work and music. She didn't quit the diner. Even with all the new attention, she loved being there. It kept her grounded. The piano still stood by the window, and she still played at night when things got quiet. The regulars would sit and listen, just like always. Some things didn't need to change. One day, she received an invitation in the mail. It was from a music festival in a nearby city. They wanted her to perform live. At first, she hesitated. The idea of playing on a real stage in front of hundreds of people scared her. She had only ever played in that small diner, surrounded by the smell of coffee and the hum of conversation. She showed the invitation to her boss and said, "I don't know if I can do it." He smiled kindly. "You can. You've already done more than you ever thought possible. This is just one more step." Her coworker chimed in, "And we'll all be watching online. You've got this." So she said yes. The night of the festival came quickly. She wore a simple dress and sat backstage, her hands trembling slightly. The crowd on the other side of the curtain buzzed with excitement. She could hear the announcer saying her name. For a moment she closed her eyes and thought of all the nights she had played alone in the diner. The soft light, the quiet room, the peace she felt. That memory gave her strength. When she walked onto the stage, the applause was loud but kind. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and began to play. The lights felt warm on her face. The sound was perfect, rich and clear. She played one of her favorite songs. then another, and then the one she had written for her father. The audience listened quietly, completely still. By the time she finished, the applause filled the hall. She stood, smiling shyly, her heart full. She had never felt so alive. After the show, people lined up to meet her. Some thanked her for her music. Others said her story gave them hope. She spoke to each one with patience and kindness, her eyes shining with gratitude. When she finally returned to her dressing room, she sat quietly for a long time, trying to take it all in. On the way home that night, she looked out the window of the car and saw the city lights passing by. Everything had changed, her life, her world, her future. Yet she still felt like the same person inside. She wasn't chasing fame. She was just following her heart. The next morning, she returned to the diner as usual. Her coworkers greeted her with cheers and hugs. "You were amazing," they said. "The whole town's proud of you." She laughed, her cheeks pink. "I'm just glad I didn't mess up," she said. Her boss smiled. "You didn't. You made history." Later that night, she played one more song on the diner piano. The lights were low, the room quiet. She closed her eyes and let her fingers move gently across the keys. The music filled the space like it always had, soft, pure, and full of heart. Outside, people still stopped by to look through the window, smiling as they listened. Some took photos. Others just stood quietly, moved by what they heard. When she finished, she looked at her reflection in the window. The same face looked back, but something inside had changed. She wasn't afraid anymore. She knew who she was, a musician who once served coffee and dreamed of music and who finally found the courage to share it with the world. The diner, the piano, and her heart had carried her this far. And deep down, she knew the story wasn't over yet. Months passed and her life slowly found a new rhythm. The album continued to grow in popularity, reaching places she had never imagined. People sent her letters from all over the world, handwritten notes full of warmth and gratitude. Some said her music helped them sleep peacefully after hard days. Others said it gave them strength when they felt lost. Every word touched her deeply. She often read those letters late at night, sitting by the same piano in the diner where everything had begun. The diner had changed, too. Tourists now came not just for the food, but to see where the famous Waitress had once been discovered. Some even asked to sit at the table closest to the piano. Her boss, proud but humble, kept things simple. "She started here," he would say with a smile, "and she still comes back." She didn't stop working there completely. Even with all the fame, she came by a few times each week. She said it reminded her of where she came from, and the piano there felt like an old friend. She would still play in the evenings, especially when the sun was low and golden light poured through the windows. The regular customers, many of whom had been there since the beginning, still clapped softly when she finished. No cameras, no stage lights, just music and heart. One evening, after she finished playing, an elderly woman approached her. She held her hand and said softly, "I lost my husband last year. For months I couldn't feel anything. But then I heard your song and it made me cry again, in a good way. Thank you for giving me that." Her eyes filled with tears as she hugged the woman. That moment reminded her of why she had started playing in the first place. It wasn't for fame or attention. It was for connection, the kind that spoke without words. She began receiving invitations to play at concerts and charity events. Each time she felt the same nervousness she'd always had before performing. But once she sat at the piano, all her fear disappeared. Her hands moved on their own, carrying her emotions into every note. The people listening could feel it. They didn't just hear music, they felt stories of love, hope, and quiet courage. One day she was invited to perform on television. It was a large event watched by millions. The idea made her anxious, but her friends and co-workers encouraged her. "Just be yourself," they said. "That's what people love about you." When the night of the show arrived, she sat backstage, her heart pounding. Cameras, lights, and people rushing around made everything feel overwhelming. But when she finally walked onto the stage and saw the piano waiting for her, all the noise faded away. She took a deep breath and smiled. She began to play one of her newest pieces, a soft, emotional melody inspired by her journey. As she played, the world seemed to slow down. The audience grew quiet, listening intently. By the time she finished, the silence turned into applause that felt endless. The host came on stage, eyes bright, and said, "You've just touched millions of hearts tonight." That performance changed everything again. Her album sales soared, and she was offered opportunities to travel abroad. She was invited to music festivals in different countries, to play for people who didn't even speak her language, but still understood her music. Everywhere she went, people treated her with warmth and respect. They called her the heart pianist because she played from the soul. But even as the world opened its doors to her, she never lost her humility. She always remembered the small diner, the quiet nights, and the first time she played in front of strangers. Those memories stayed with her, grounding her through all the noise of success. During one of her trips, she was invited to perform in a large concert hall filled with thousands of people. As she waited backstage, she held a small photograph of her father, the same one she had carried for years. She whispered quietly, "I hope you're proud of me." When she walked onto the stage, the audience erupted in cheers. She smiled shyly and sat at the grand piano. The lights dimmed, and for a moment everything was still. Then she began to play the song she had written for her father, the one that had always been closest to her heart. The melody filled the hall, delicate and full of emotion. People in the audience closed their eyes, some wiping away tears. When she finished, the applause was thunderous. She stood and bowed deeply, tears shining in her eyes. That night she felt something she couldn't put into words, a sense of peace, as if her father had been there with her, listening proudly. After the concert, she stepped outside for some fresh air. The city lights sparkled in the distance, and the cool wind brushed against her face. She looked up at the sky and smiled softly. Life had taken her from a small diner to the biggest stages in the world. But through it all, she had remained the same person, quiet, humble, and full of love for her music. Over time, she started using her success to help others. She donated instruments to schools and music programs for children who couldn't afford them. "Everyone deserves a chance to find their song," she said in an interview. Her kindness became as well known as her music. People admired her not just for her talent, but for her heart. One afternoon, she returned to her hometown after months of traveling. The diner looked the same as always. The same creaky door, the same smell of coffee and pie. Her coworkers welcomed her with hugs and laughter. "You're still one of us," her boss said, grinning. She laughed, feeling completely at home. That night, she played at the diner again. The crowd was small, mostly locals and a few travelers who had heard stories about her. She played softly, letting each note float through the warm air. Outside, people walking by stopped to listen through the windows just like before. It felt perfect, simple and real. When she finished, the whole diner stood and clapped. She looked around, smiling at the familiar faces, people who had supported her from the very start. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for believing in me before I believed in myself." After everyone left, she sat alone at the piano for a while, running her fingers gently over the keys. The room was peaceful. She thought about everything, her struggles, her doubts, the moments when she almost gave up. All of it had led her here. The sound of the diner clock ticking filled the silence. She smiled and began to play one last tune, something new, something soft. It was a song about hope, about finding light in unexpected places. She knew she would share it one day, but for now it was just for her. As she played, she realized something important. It wasn't the fame, the applause, or even the success that mattered most. It was the people she had met, the hearts she had touched, and the courage she had found along the way. Her journey had started with fear, but it ended with faith. In herself, in her music, and in the beauty of small beginnings. Outside, the night was quiet. The stars shimmered above the diner, the same way they had the first time she played there. She finished her song, took a deep breath, and smiled. The world had changed around her, but the piano and her love for it had stayed the same. Somewhere in the distance, a car passed by, its headlights reflecting on the window. She watched it fade into the night, then turned back to the piano, placing her hand gently on the keys. She whispered softly, "Thank you." The story of the waitress who played like a legend would live on, not just in her music, but in every person who found courage in her story. She had proven that even the quietest dreams can grow loud enough for the world to hear. And as the lights dimmed and the diner fell silent, her music lingered in the air, gentle, timeless, and full of heart.